IVM.
Hi and welcome to New York Kanoon. This is Amber from Corpus Legal. Continuing the second leg of the advent of Section 498A, here are the steps that the government took to ensure the legislation was concrete. Now, initially in India, there was something called as the Dowry Prohibition Act in 1961, which was dealing with the issue of dowry only, which is, if there was a demand of dowry, what would the woman do? I mean, she would only go to the court and the court would just be like, okay, show us the proof that there has been a dowry demand, to which the woman had to go through Dowry Prohibition Act. It is a good piece of legislation, but it could not really help in terms of cruelty as we are discussing, and I gave you a small intro due to our socioeconomic background. The husbands could go scot-free. There were no provisions where it was made, non-cognizable, cognizable, or there was bail, no bail. I mean, they were all complex situations. I mean, since all these affairs are a little private in the family, it is very difficult for the state to intervene. And I mean, it was for the woman to prove that, something had been done to her, and there was no question of presumption here. And, the burden of proof again lied on the person who was harmed, whereas it should be the other way around to give her that liberty. So for the first time, the criminal law amendment came into picture where, there were committees which sat down and made recommendations as to what should be done about it. So the first thing which came into picture was that there should be, the whole intent should be that there should be absolute presumption beyond reasonable doubt when there's an accusation that the female has gone through something or the woman has gone through something. That is one of the most enacting features of the criminal law amendment which helped develop 498A. Now, if you're accused of the particular act of cruelty, I mean, the guy has to go through something called as presumption where he has to defend himself. He has to prove that he has not done the particular act. So this was one of the major reasons that victim did not need to prove anything. I mean, it was the accused who had to go through this. Then came the second criminal law amendment where 26th or 23rd of December, if I'm not fairly wrong, in 1983, when the first draft came out and the legislation was enacted where they said, stringent punishment should be there. The law should be one which causes it should be a bulwark of stopping the whole episode of cruelty on women. What happened during this period of criminal law amendment and why it became so strong was there were two major cases. One was of Manjushri Sharda, which we all know was head of one of the major points in the feminist movement in this country, and Shaila Latkar. They were two of these major cases. To give you a small gist of what Manjushri Sharda case is, Manjushri Sharda was a woman of reasonable intelligence, a wonderful adjusting human being, as per the case experts I'm reading out, and she was diligent, willing to adjust in the family. The husband subjected her to cruelty in the sense that he would not treat her right. She was just basically kept as a maid. That is the feeling she was getting, and she communicated this to the husband every now and then, but there were no steps taken in the same. He had an extramarital affair. He was also going through certain ups and downs, and all the burden was being put on the woman, and she was adhering to it. So what really is interesting in this case is you have to see how reasonable was she. I mean, she was a reasonable person. She was adjusting in all socioeconomic backgrounds, and she might have been from a different society altogether. So the court acknowledged the whole thing there. I mean, the feminist movement came into picture, and this was brought out that, if somebody who's reasonable and who's legit and who's doing everything possible to ensure that the household is stuck together, there should be a law to prevent such a person from being abused. India and our judicial system is amazing because they have realized this. I mean, I would not criticize the judiciary. They realize the values of the system, as they say, of the marriage institution, and they said, well, right, that is right. If there is somebody who's reasonable, who has knowledge, and who is able to understand everything and is trying the best to ensure that the marriage works, then there should be some safeguarding. And hence that was the first step where 498A, the question of beyond reasonable doubt, was introduced that I was discussing, and hence the whole law got framed and came out like that. So coming to the second now I'll bring out what actually the act meant, what it actually meant. I mean, there was Evidence Act also along with it. So I'll connect all the three. So Evidence Act, coming to the point of Evidence Act. Now, all of us know the Indian Evidence Act talks about confessions, how people put up words, how the evidence has to be treated. The law initially thought that, apart from Dowry Prohibition Act, there should be some amendments in the Evidence Act as well to ensure that, the individual is not able to escape the whole situation. If he's escaped dowry, he should not escape the Evidence Act. And in the Evidence Act, what they did was they introduced the initial concept of the individual under Section 113A that he has abetted, within 7 years of marriage. So, within 7 years of marriage means, the law said anyone who's married and within 7 years of her marriage, marriage has committed suicide or has died of circumstances which are not known, the 113 section particularly said that, it will be presumed that the husband had abetted or helped in the particular suicide, or her relatives had helped. This was not the case earlier. So this was one of the another major breakthroughs where husband was presumed. Now, what I would like to bring to the listeners' notice is that the section talks about shall and not may. The word shall and may is used that, it may be or it shall be. That is what has to be seen. So by shall I mean is that, it has to be proved on the first point again that, there was some involvement. So those nexus has to be there in order for that section to come out, 113 to come out. So which was again a repressing section because, again for the woman to prove that he was involved required a lot of gathering of evidence, and it was a little bit falling on her again to prove the particular thing. So it was a positive step until, 498 came in and 113 really helped. And formed a broader sphere. Apart from the law amendment, another step which the government took in this whole process of 498A was directing the investigation officers and the police officers and respective bodies, executive magistrates, that post-mortem be made mandatory on death of the respective individual if it is by suicide or an unknown circumstances, and the same be reported, there are situations, and I've seen many, where the policemen or the authorities are made to believe something else, or there is conniving between individuals on lower level and the justice system is led to believe in something else. So those provisions were introduced, and it was said that, to summarize it in 4.5, it was said that in case the case involves suicide by a woman within 7 years of a marriage, the case leads to death and is one where the suicide is impertinent and it is seen that it has happened and there is some amount of incrimination coming from the whole episode that has happened, the police has to take cognizance and to ensure that, post-mortem is done and the individual is indicted. So this was one of the basic steps which they moved towards, since state could not involve privately, publicly, this was one of the introductions which was made. Now, coming to the other leg of it, which all listeners should be aware of, is that when the post-mortem started happening back then, the reports were being submitted by anybody else, it could not be a doctor, it could be any surgeon, who would just give out his report saying, no, the death had happened in different circumstances. But the law, interestingly, made it important that, a civil surgeon in a case where there is death within 7 years of the marriage has to ensure that a civil report is given, and not to just anyone else. It has to be submitted to a police officer, which means that the police officer in person was given the respective document in hand, which was an interesting piece of legislation and again a good remark altogether to help catch the individual. This completes our second leg of the journey on the advent of the legislation of Section 498A. In the following episode, we'll be covering other details as to how finally the law got crystallized. Thank you for listening to Know Your Kanoon. For more queries and questions, please contact me at contact@corpuslegal.in. Catch Know Your Kanoon every week on the IVM website or the app or anywhere you get your podcast from.
Look! Up in the internet! It's a meme! No! It's a cat video! No! It's the Geek Fruit Podcast!
That's right, we interrupt this riveting broadcast to tell you about our show, the Geek Fruit Podcast, where Tejas, Dinkar and I, Jishnu, talk about everything in pop culture, including DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Netflix, and everything in between.
You know how your friends hate it when you ramble about some nerdy crap and you just want somebody to listen to you? Well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that, but come listen to us ramble and it'll almost be like the real thing. Kind of.
Listen to new episodes of the Geek Fruit Podcast every Monday and the Geek Fruit Bulletin every Thursday on iTunes, Google Podcasts, the IVM app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Happy listening, you nerds.
Every week comes a show where three people come together to tell you about stuff they like. A movie, a TV show, a book, and other stuff. Tune in every Monday on the IVM Podcast app to IVM Likes. Batman approves this message. Thank you, Batman.